Scribble notes when I wrote these quotes. If I offend, pardon me, there's more of me to grow. Creative in my process, enjoy the show. The will is different when you recognize the different strokes. Different folks, same goals, we all want the most. So when we reach the top, we can enjoy the toast. The type of bread we get is fresh about the bakery. Told them don't play with me, with or without a degree. Don't question my intensity, bravery. Similar to agencies that want to see you fold. So just pray for me. Yeah, Einstein with my energy.
Welcome to the Scribble Notes podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm on the moon right now. Just an amazing day. Great way to start the week. Baby's first steps,
That's awesome.
Can't really ask for much more. Why don't you introduce yourself for the thank you. Why don't you introduce yourself for the listeners and tell them what you do, where you're from, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so my name is Luke Roberts. I also go by LJR. That's my artist name. I'm a singer, songwriter, filmmaker, and social entrepreneur. Right now I'm based in Ellicott City, Maryland. I grew up in Laurel, so not too far from here. But basically my life is about three things: creating art, empowering people, and building relationships. So my primary art is doing music and film. I write all my own songs. I'm releasing my debut album right now, one song at a time. It's called When the Sky Began to Fall. I'm doing an accompanying short film sci-fi music video series that goes along with that kind of delves into a lot of my personal experience with trauma from the evangelical church, and also how that kind of interplays with some of the emotional neglect that I experienced growing up. And that's and I do all the directing and planning and location scouting, all that kind of stuff for it, editing and special effects as well. And that's kind of the primary art stuff. And then empowering people, that's really focused on an app that I've built called FundUp. It's a web app, so you can find it at fundup.app. It's not like a downloadable app on App Store or Google Play just yet. But basically it gives people an easy way to multiply their giving to nonprofits they care about. You give a couple dollars a month to your favorite nonprofit. You have a unique referral link you send to your friends and family who give. They get their own unique links, send to their friends and family who give, so on and so forth. And pretty soon you've got a whole bunch of people that are giving because of you. So you're giving $5 a month, but because of you, $50 to $100 a month. Or if you know a famous influencer who wants to do this and use it to raise money, you might be the reason that a couple $1,000s a month is going to your favorite nonprofit. So that's kind of the empowering people. How do you take technology, leverage it to be able to give people an easy way to make a big impact in the world, to make it a better place, and also build a sense of personal power around what change they're able to personally make happen in the world. And then building relationships is really just like what we're doing now, connecting with new people that are doing awesome things, and just doing coffee with people, getting to know, what's on the heart of an individual, and finding ways to connect with people that walk different, that are part of different walks of life. So yeah,
I love it. I love everything you just said. I'm interested to know a little bit about your background growing up. What was it like for you? What's the world like?
Well, growing up, so I was homeschooled. It was like one of those umbrella organizations that's technically a private school, but you're totally homeschooled because you only you start going to group classes once a week in 7th grade. Oh, and that's the most kind of group schooling that you get. So, we were taking all the classes at home. I had a lot of aptitude towards math and science. But the big thing was really Christianity. My family was really religious, and we were part of this church growing up. There was a non-denominational church that started out at 300 people. And by the time I was 18 or so, it was thousands of people. It built this huge campus, a couple thousand people would attend every Sunday morning. And I was a pastor's kid there. My dad was the pastor of worship and director of technology. And, everything was about bringing the gospel to the world. And so every aspect, and that was at the core fundamental part of who you are as a person. Why do you exist? What gives meaning into your life? So everything else was kind of in context to that, even what job you would choose, who your partner would be, what friends you would have, what level of depth of relationship you would feel that you would trust in your friendships based on what they believe, all this kind of stuff. And it basically meant that all your friendships were agendified in a way, to use a word that I maybe just created, into like I now have to save you. And how do I do that? How do I convince you that Jesus died to pay for your sins? So I didn't see it at the time. I thought this is generally what it means to love somebody, which I still follow that logic of like, oh, I can see if you really believe this and you think everybody else is going to hell unless they believe this, it is part of what it means to love them, to try to like help them see the truth, right? I can get that. But eventually my faith fell apart. And it was, and I, went into a deep existential crisis for many years, and it's taken me a long time to work out of that. But I was super involved, man. It was like, every Sunday, the entire day, literally like 6 a.m. to like 9 p.m. was like at church, practicing, playing all 3 services. I played drums and sang in the worship band, led worship. And there were Bible studies, all that kind of stuff. So that was like most of my upbringing was, between like education and church. Homeschoolers don't really get to play sports very much. So I played like some pickup stuff. But that was kind of like early life. I went to school for mechanical engineering, which is kind of a total, side thing from what I'm doing now. But it's, I was good at math and science, so it kind of made the most sense. And it's what my parents thought was great. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, which is put together a whole complex narrative for why I think that is. Everybody goes through something similar. I've kind of got my own story for why I think for me, I was in that situation. But I went all the way, I was part of a scholarship program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, called the Meyerhoff program, which focused in on like pushing people to go get PhDs in the STEM fields. So, I got my degree and then went on to Maryland grad school to get my PhD, and focused on autonomous aerobatics and navigation in flapping wing miniature air vehicles, or robotic birds, basically. So published a couple papers on that. And I just realized over time that like, I was just not happy, even though like I got this cool ass project that I was working on. It's like, basically one of my friends was like, so you're saying you're complaining about like working with a robotic, like an RC bird all day long? Like you just get to play with this RC toy. And it's not exactly that simple, as people were very complex. And, but yeah, I just found myself like going down this mental hole, getting more depressed, getting more honestly angry, feeling like I wasn't in charge of my life. And eventually listening to this podcast on the way to grad school, I heard it was called The Strategic Entrepreneur, and it's not like on Apple Podcasts anymore. I think you can find it online, but they would always end the podcast saying this phrase. They'd say, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is more people who've come alive. So that really stuck with me really heavily. And that's kind of where I got those 3 things I started out with, like creating art, empowering people, and building relationships. So yeah, so I eventually did end up quitting grad school just before I got to the point where I would have gotten my PhD. So I did get my master's, but I decided to leave because I wasn't making decisions based on what I really cared about. I definitely didn't care about having a PhD, and decided I'm going to leave and try to pursue that. Like, well, I'm going to figure out art, and like whatever I do with my life, I want it to be in one of those 3 categories. So that transitioned into mainly focusing on music. I learned how to do video as a way to support the music and to like make my own YouTube videos for the covers I was doing at the time. And that just transitioned into like a little video production company on the side that really gave, a lot of value to other artists, but also allowed me to kind of have the money that I needed to make everything work. And then over time, my dad and I, throughout kind of this whole process of grad school through now, my dad and I went through a number of different iterations of the app I was talking about, FundUp, and finally kind of settled on where we are, right now with it, which I think is a really exciting product that I think has the potential to just to change a lot of lives, both on the receiving end of who gets the donations with the nonprofits and the kind of the end, beneficiaries of that, but also on the side of like people who actually take and use this tool to make an impact.
No, that's awesome. Like you touched on a lot of things in your story, but so much of it was about finding your identity. And I think one thing you said definitely hit me, like being young when you're kind of impressed in identity. Like, this is what you are going to do. This is how your day's going to look, how your week's going to look, how your year's going to look. And as you get older, you sort of come to that middle road where you have to start deciding for yourself what that will look like, what your life's going to look like. And even going to college and getting a degree and saying, this seems like what is right. This seems like what I should be doing. This seems like who I have to be. In learning a little bit more about yourself, even after that, starting a program, getting a master's degree, it still doesn't always fulfill every piece of you. I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the idea that, like, oh, education is going to solve all your problems, because it doesn't sometimes. Like, I know for myself, I got my master's degree a couple years ago now, and it's in a field I really enjoy. It's a field I work in. It's in higher education, but it wasn't everything, right? I still needed to find other pieces of my identity. And that's when I started writing books and started becoming an author. I published dark fantasy, which is far outside of me playing football. I played football for 8 years, played college football too. And that has nothing to do with dark fantasy. It has nothing to do with medieval dark fantasy and the world of magic. But that's what really speaks to me. That's what I enjoyed the most. And I've always enjoyed it. It just wasn't a part of who I could be at that time when I was younger. But I've found it more so as I've gotten older. So I definitely resonate with a lot of things you just said.
That's awesome. It's interesting because, like, in the process of creating your identity, there's certain things that will help you to do that, and certain things that will, like, so that you can do that earlier, and kind of what I would say is like a healthy or normal developmental process. And then there's certain things that will, like, very much delay that process. And trauma is definitely one of those things that, like, will delay that process. And that could be either, physical abuse or emotional abuse, emotional neglect. And what there's one of the world's foremost trauma researchers. His name is Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, talking a lot about, like, how trauma impacts people long term. And it's like this huge, crazy epidemic that he was even able to discover that, like, the emotional neglect can have as bad and sometimes even worse impacts than physical abuse. Wow. Because normally when people think about trauma, they think, oh, like, physical stuff is, like, the worst stuff. And it's always, all of it is bad, right? But it's actually kind of counterintuitively so. Sometimes the emotional can be worse, which is pretty crazy. So when it comes to forming your own identity, in my story, part of the challenge was, like, the way that the church was set up and the kind of the belief structure, because in order to properly become an adult, you really have to individuate. You have to figure out who you are, what are your own thoughts, get a level of autonomy. And, like, the church doesn't really support that, at least not the one I went to. And I would be hard pressed to actually believe that there may be some very progressive churches that do, but typically there's, like, a very specific kind of rigid set of, this is what it means to be a good person, right? And you might say, like, well, to be part of that community, and yes, but, like, literally to be a good person. So if you are to actually individuate away from what they believe, like, you have to be willing to say, well, maybe I'm not a good person, to kind of start off. You have to be willing to, like, entertain that thought in your mind. And you also have to believe, if you're going to start going the opposite direction, say, like, actually, no, I am a good person and they were wrong. You have to believe that you have the power to be able to say who is right and who isn't wrong. Like, you have to believe that about yourself. And one of the things that's challenging about religion, especially when it's very, like, fundamentalist, is that you're taught a lot of messages that you internalize that tell you that you're not powerful. So, we're taught, for example, in the evangelical church that, like, I am weak, but he is strong, right? And, I am nothing, I am worthless, I am powerless to change my situation or whatever. I have to depend on God. And we're taught this, like, really, really heavily. And I know everybody kind of absorbs these messages a little bit differently. I found that, for me, that basically, like, especially combined with the emotional neglect stuff, really amplified a sense of like, I am not powerful. I have zero power. And the only way that I could move forward in any of that stuff and to feel a sense of power was to externalize it in this sense of God, right? Because God gives you that. So if we can, there's a whole conversation around like, does God exist or does he not? But, or do they not, or, whatever, like, but at very least, you're able to access that power if you can externalize it. So when I eventually lost my faith, like I couldn't even access that anymore. So it's like this whole journey to try to rebuild a sense, or to build for the first time a sense of true internal power, so that I could say like what mattered, which is like a whole other interesting thing. So I think that's just kind of what you brought up with the identity thing really made me think of. That was a big part of discovering kind of who I was, and completing is the wrong word, but like getting to the point where I am now in my, journey, because we're always growing, we're always going to, experience change. And that's part of the beauty of life.
Yeah, it's so crazy, but it's so much of it's choice, right? Being able to have the choice and feel like you have a choice, feeling like you have some sort of power or control over your life, is crucial to your identity. Because if you live in a world, I was just watching a TV show earlier, All American on Netflix, and one of the characters just feels like she has no choice in the matter, like, in a situation, and for me, it's funny because it is a TV show, so I know how it's going to turn out for her, but it's waiting for that moment when they realize that they can finally make the decision that they want for their life, that really will be the thing that empowers them to go forward. That regardless of how other people interact or interpret their decision, that it is their decision. And that's where your identity really starts, because you finally get to plant the seed that you want to plant, versus the ones that were planted for you.
Totally. And I think a lot of that is tied to the kind of emotional neglect that breeds codependency. A lot of what will keep people tied and feel like they're stuck, that they can't actually make a different choice, is a sense of responsibility for other people's experience. And while it's very important that we recognize how our choices impact others, there's a massive amount of people who struggle with making choices that actually are going to be the right choices for themselves, because they've been taught that they have to prioritize other people's needs first. And obviously there are some situations where this is true. Like if you have kids, like you are responsible for meeting their needs. But, if you're in a relationship with a partner, right? Like there's obviously certain needs that you're kind of agreeing to meet, with each other, but those are not not basic needs, like, oh, like I am enough. Like you need to be working on meeting kind of your own internal needs around, or like I am, I have the power to make choices in my life, or like my happiness is not your responsibility, as my partner. Like those kind of things are really important for us to make sure that we're taking responsibility for. And a lot of what will happen is when parents are not emotionally mature, meaning they haven't healed from damage that they got, they end up putting their own needs first with their child unintentionally. They don't even know. They're making all these sacrifices for their kids, but there's still a lot of ways in which they put their emotional needs first. And the kid will learn that, oh, actually my needs don't matter. I always have, in order to have a sense of secure attachment to my parent, or the closest thing I can get to a secure attachment, I have to show up in the way that they need me to show up. So it becomes this very conditional sort of acceptance. And then this pattern where they are basically meeting their parents' needs in order to survive. So then they mirror, and we just mirror these patterns, these relational dynamics out in our future relationships. To do the same thing, you kind of assume that I'm responsible for meeting this other person's needs. And you also assume that they're responsible for meeting your needs in ways that you oftentimes don't even see. And this is part of why it's really hard for people who are in the situation where they have a lot of needs that they're not meeting for themselves, and they're with somebody who's actually healthy. It'll feel unsafe because it's not familiar, and we're drawn to what's familiar. That's how where we know how to operate. And the person may feel like they're not, like their partner's not loving them because they experience love as this codependent interaction. So healthiness is actually terrifying to interact with. And you have to like, that's why working on yourself is so important to be able to get to that point to have healthy relationships.
Yeah, you have to spend some time building and reflecting and understanding what traumas you experienced. I know for myself, even when I was in college, I hadn't really understood what my childhood was, and the things that I had normalized as this is how things are. Yeah. It was the first time I was in an environment that was outside of just my own growing up, and then learning like, hey, that's not healthy. That isn't correct. Like, this isn't how people should behave or act towards each other. That's when I realized, oh, this is how I can present myself and move forward. I don't have to be what my environment once was, but it took having some independence and having a little bit of distance also helped from being away from that situation. Yeah. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of your other endeavors, because you had this long history, and then all of a sudden you said, I'm going to change my life, and then you did. So talk to me about that. How'd you get there? And what are you doing now? And how did you find your way to music and film and all these things?
Yeah. Well, so the basic, I mean, well, if we kind of start when I went to, undergrad, mechanical engineering, went to grad school, studying all this stuff, building this robotic bird, definitely something that like other people really wanted me to do. I also thought to myself, like, this is a cool opportunity. I mean, I even got paid. Like, a lot of people don't know, but like, if you go and get your PhD in the STEM fields, you usually will get that paid for by your advisor, whoever's, kind of overseeing your project. And you usually get a stipend. So you can get paid $28,000, especially like in the more like tech fields. If it's more like bio or, things like that, that are, not quite as like techy, but more focused on like chemistry, biochem, stuff like that. Typically that's going to be a little bit less, sometimes a lot less. It's all like research based, right? So we're not talking about like if you're going to actually be like a clinical doctor, things like that. But it'll get paid for at at tons and tons of universities. In fact, like Carnegie Mellon University won't even accept people if they can't pay for them. So yeah, and I even I got a fellowship to go do it, and I got like on the higher end. I even got paid like, I think it was 30. I got 28,000 plus a $5,000 dean's fellowship. And then even the next year, I applied for outside funding and got that, and I got to keep the dean's fellowship. So then it was like almost $40,000 I was making, being paid as like a job to go to school, and I got my tuition covered. So it was an amazing situation. And I learned a ton, but I definitely found that I was just like dying inside. I kept doing things for other people. My parents wanted me to finish. I wasn't really happy. I didn't even know what I really wanted. So there's a lot of like, and this was also when my faith was like really falling apart. My girlfriend at the time, who I thought we were going to get married, we broke up. My family really started to like kind of fall apart in a lot of ways. There's a lot of hurt that kind of came up around that time. That just became a massive issue that has taken us years to try to work through. So there's a lot of like difficulty, and it really gave me the chance to ask myself, what do I really want? And honestly, my older brother inspired that a lot too. He really pushed me to ask that question. And so I started to, ask myself, well, what is it I really want? And I forget where it was. It might have been the same podcast, but they talked about like, what is the one thing that you would do for the rest of your life if you never got paid? And like, go do that, or try to figure out how to do that. And that for me was music. I knew that like I was always going to do that. I didn't know if I wanted it to be like my life. My older brother had wanted to be in a band, with me and my younger brother, which we were briefly, but didn't work out long term because I didn't think I wanted to do that for my life. Of course, as I actually give myself the chance to figure out what I really want, that ends up being kind of the primary direction. So I just kind of, once I left grad school, which is a decision that took me a couple of years to make, I decided like it's really about music, I think. And then there's like a number of years I spent kind of floundering around not making decisions that were in line with music being the number one priority. And because I was so fucked up in my head, not able to truly understand like what I really wanted and what my driving forces were. Because again, when you lose such a gigantic narrative as Christianity, with that, if you really believe in it hardcore, you've lost your meaning for everything. You can't, and you don't believe in your own power, like I talked about earlier. So you can't actually say this matters. So it's hard to get fulfillment out of these things. Where I've come to now is like, well, fulfillment comes from accomplishing the things that you want. And the fact that you want it is actually the thing that makes it valuable. You know, that's totally legit. But it took me a long time to get there because combined with all the other stuff we talked about earlier, like I didn't feel like what I wanted mattered at all, especially in compared to this big narrative. So eventually, after floundering about, trying some different covers, like making covers to post on YouTube, and starting to make more videos and people liking the videos, that's when other artists started to ask me to make their music videos. And so that kind of pushed me a little bit more towards some of the film stuff. I discovered I just really genuinely enjoy doing this. I enjoy being an entrepreneur, making my own way in the world. And, you know, slowly I was kind of iterating on FundUp as well with my dad. And doing a lot of, especially when I started to go to therapy, like things really started to come together more because I had somebody who would really, without any judgment at all, like help me dig into my brain and figure out what in the world is going on and what are the messages that are in there. But that's kind of generally how I transitioned from all that stuff into music. And, you know, now like music is definitely kind of my number one priority. FundUp is number two. And then after that is like kind of the videography business. I think with the music, like I make all my own music videos, including that sci-fi series. And I just love doing that. So that's obviously up there kind of with number one as well. But that's the general way that I transitioned over.
That's awesome. What's your creative process look like when you're making music?
So music, usually I'll just like sit down, start playing some chords and just try to I'll just like start singing and see what comes out and kind of iterate on that. Like, oh, like I really like that. And I try not to have any sort of judgment for whatever words come out. It might be something that doesn't make any sense at all. And then later I find out that it actually does make sense for something I was internally processing. That's a whole other, you know, weird thing. But I just try to get it all out and slowly go through and make everything. Sometimes I'll use voice memos to record so I don't forget what it is, you know, that I'm working on. But I usually try to go through and record a couple different parts, you know, make a verse, make a chorus. And I've learned to over time to just trust whatever flows out of me, even if the words don't make sense, because there's been times I've discovered like a couple of years later what I was actually writing about, which is like a really, really weird thing to discover like, oh, like I didn't think that this made sense, but actually, holy shit, this is exactly what I was going through. I just couldn't see it. So I learned to trust that. When it comes to the video and film stuff, that's a lot, it's gotta be a lot more organized because there's a whole team of people. So typically there, I've got kind of an overarching narrative structure for the album in terms of what it's overall about and where that's going. And so I take each one of the songs and figure out what is this supposed to symbolize and how do I tell that story? And I slowly develop characters and build this whole kind of world around that concept. In this case, which is kind of the interplay of the emotional neglect and loss of faith and the Christian church and the trauma that came with that. And try to represent that journey, that internal journey for me symbolically, using all these sci-fi, you know, effects and stuff that I found online that I just totally love. You know, like I made a force field in the last one, or like putting in a spaceship. The goal is eventually by the end of the thing, I'm going to have myself going to space, going to learn how to use Unreal Engine 5. And I think it's going to be so fun.
That's awesome.
So there's lots to do, but that's kind of generally the process there. Once I get the overall idea of what it is, I'll actually write out the general story. And then I'll write out a shot list as well, like specifically, oh, this now cuts to a close up, you know, the face or a side view or whatever, and kind of go through and do that just so I can get like a real picture of what it is. And I distribute that to my team. We plan out, you know, the shoots, figure out when they're available, all that kind of stuff, and then actually do it and then go through the editing process, throw out a ton of footage that doesn't, work. You have to do all the sound effects and Foley and other music that comes in during the cut scenes and all that stuff. So it's a lot, but it's like so rewarding. I do not feel more fulfilled and empowered than when I'm either on stage doing a concert or like actually seeing, like after I finished kind of one of these videos, like watching it back, being like, that is awesome. It's so cool.
No, that sounds cool. It's like it's so interesting how many different like ways your brain can interpret information. So just talking about making music, it's like, oh, I just like speak it out, playing chords, voice memos. I'll like it all just feels like a feeling, right? Like your body is just making it happen. And you're like, oh, now I'm editing. I'm making shot lists. I'm like deciding each step. Like I'm very organized and like this whole process to it. It is so crazy how you can just shift and still have joy with both, because that's difficult. And when you're working with other people, what does that look like as far as editing their stuff and going through that process with other folks?
Yeah, so I know that right now I need to dedicate like most of my active creative energy to my own work. So what I do is obviously I don't want to ever shortchange anybody on whatever I create for them. So I just create a specific set of products that I know are really easy to create. That will take me minimal time, but like deliver maximum value. And then I basically only market those products. So that looks like one take music videos, where we don't do like a ton of planning or like a ton of props, things like that. We can either do like a kind of a performance video where you're just playing the song and the location, or we can kind of say, okay, we want to come up with ideas in this one location for this song, and generally this is kind of the concept. We'll show up on the day, we'll kind of plan out what that looks like, but that's the limit of it. We're not going to do like a big pre-production thing and try to come up with a complex narrative to kind of tell the story. That's something that I would personally recommend other music video or videographers for. And just be upfront with that, and then just make sure that like when I'm delivering, and I also do like the multi-angle, performance video shots for artists. And I've streamlined my editing process so that I can, shoot and edit one of those easily within a day, and deliver the first draft, by the end of the day or the end of the next day, depending on if we're shooting in the evening or the morning. And then the one takes, there's hardly any editing. You just chop off the end in the beginning. So I can shoot like 4 of those in 4 hours, spend the second half of the day editing that content. And then that turns in, and if you charge, $250 per video for that, that's $1,000 for the day. So that's kind of generally how I've structured it, is like, well, what's the minimum that I need to get paid in order for me to spend the most on my art? So my general number was like, I just want to spend 5 days working out of the month on like other people's stuff, not spend a ton of like active creative energy to create narratives, because that's one of the more involved like things for me, but still over deliver on the value, and be able to make at least 5K a month, and kind of move forward like that. So, and now actually I've got a whole nother thing where we basically do that same thing, but we have like a whole day event that's for like solo acoustic artists, where they come in, they have like a 45-minute time slot to film as many videos as they want. The first one's $250, each one after that's $150. And if you're prepared, you can easily do like 4 videos within that time frame, and you're getting a kick-ass rate. And like my stuff's really pro when it comes to the video stuff. So you're getting really great videos for like nothing, but we can cycle people through, and you could film 10 people in a day. And if you film 10 people that are just doing one video, that's a $2,500 day. And that's also like a subscription worthy product that if artists don't have the money to spend a lot more than that a month on content, or don't have that much content to film, it kind of solves all those problems. And it's cool because I actually discovered that like nonprofits will actually like subsidize that, because they want their artists to be able to have opportunities to this. So there's a nonprofit in Philly that even before we have anybody that's signed out, has already committed like $2,500 in donations toward helping these artists get those videos, which is awesome. So Really
No,
pumped about it.
that's awesome. That's awesome. There's so much complexity to this business, but you've really put it into, you just explained it in a way that's so helpful. I think for anyone that's listening, just to understand the way to maximize your time to be able to do the thing you want to be able to do, but also be able to support your life outside of just work. So it's really cool how you just explained that. I wanted to ask, where's the furthest that you've traveled to perform?
Ooh, well,
Because you're in Maryland, so where's the furthest from Maryland that you've been?
yeah, that's a great question. The furthest that I've actually performed. Well, so I'm not a very large artist right now. My goal is obviously to be much, much larger, gigantic even. But I'd say probably the farthest I've traveled is probably like Virginia or PA, something like that, I think.
Right.
I mean, I might have played a couple shows in Delaware or something like that. I've really focused on building my fan base online using an automated marketing system, because it's kind of hard to go on tour if you don't know that people are going to show up. It's a lot of money, especially if you're a solo artist. Like I have to hire people to go with me. So I can't just be like, well, you know, we're all in this for the dream. You know, I'm in it for the dream. They're, you know, they got to make a living. So I've got to build the fan base first so I can make sure that, you know, when I go to cities, like I've got 200 people that I can, you know, text and be like, hey, I'm going to be there 2 weeks from now, you know, come out and check it out, that kind of thing, or some other plan that'll kind of guarantee that. So I haven't traveled that far. I think the farthest I went for my music, just in general, was LA. Back in 2011, it was 2011. I actually won like an international online songwriting competition. It's called Yobi Sing. I don't think it's around anymore. But it's kind of funny because I mean, I won a bunch of money. It was like $18,000 and they gave you tickets to the Grammys and stuff, which is awesome. But the year I was the host the year after, because they asked the winner to like host the next season. So I did. And one of the people who entered, who I thought personally had the best song, was none other than Charlie Puth.
Stop it.
So there was a brief time period where Charlie Puth and I were friends on Facebook. He actually wrote on my wall because he was like, he looked up at me like this. You know, he was down here and he looked up at me like, oh my God, you know. And now I look up at him and I'm like, oh my God. So I've totally like tried to tweet him and be like, Charlie, remember me? Like, you know, great to see you getting so far, you know, all that stuff. But I've obviously
you're doing well. I see you're doing well.
Yeah. That actually, you know, it'd be hilarious. He's super active on TikTok. I should try to do something with his stuff on TikTok, make it like the best thing I've ever made, and be like, by the way, you remember that whole like Yobi Sing thing? Like, I don't know, just see if he remembers me.
Like, yeah, I remember you. Like, yeah, I heard that song you got. See you again.
Exactly. Now make me famous, Charlie.
No, that's really cool. I was just wondering because I work in campus activities and we do a ton of events with like musicians and all types of stuff. So I know the college scene is always looking for more acts and musicians when touring.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely love to do that. I've heard a lot about how, I mean, it's just a great spot to like connect with people. I mean, there's so many people that are looking for great music, people that, you know, are just, they're exploring who they are. You know, it's such a cool time to connect with people. And also like, it's just a great way to go as a musician because it pays really well, you know, for your music. So I know it's harder to get those relationships typically. I know that like you got to do your showcase and everything and be accepted into like NACA and AACPA.
Yeah, NACA's the big one. I'm on one of the committees for NACA, so I'm part of the planning of the conferences, and It is so hard. Like there's so many performers, so it's a whole process, but it's really cool. I love colleges. I have a few friends who are musicians that I'm constantly like, you need to perform at colleges. There's colleges all over, and we're easy places.
Yeah, man, we'll definitely have to stay in touch. I mean, I don't know if there's like conflict of interest stuff when it comes to if you're on a committee at NACA or whatever, but I'd love to, you know, chat with you about what that might look like going forward. Because I mean, even if it's just like around here, I can, book a couple of shows that I know I can take my band to. I mean, they cost, for me, I got 4 people in the band. So it's like $150 a person, per show. And then obviously if we're touring, I got to cover other stuff too.
And travel.
Yeah. So there's a lot of other stuff. But if I could even if I could just cover that and not lose money on a tour, that'd be awesome. And then I could also play in other shows that are at clubs and stuff around. And that'd be kick ass.
Yeah, I'll definitely connect you on that, because it's really cool. I love the college scene as far as music goes, because there's so many schools, so many interests, big and small. Everyone's always looking for something to do on a Thursday afternoon or Thursday night. It's cool. Yeah. But I did want to ask you about just things that have been difficult. What's been the most difficult part post university, post all of that? What's been the most difficult part being a creative person and trying to be an entrepreneur, or you're successfully being an entrepreneur month to month? Like, what does that look like? What's been most difficult?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing is definitely like the volatility of, you don't know how much you're going to make that month, so there's a certain, like, you're always trying to minimize your expenses, but you also want to be able to, take advantage of whatever the thing is that might really kind of take you to the next level, or, coaching programs that all, promise really great things and stuff like that. Being able to filter through that's really tough. But honestly, like, the thing that I found has been the hardest is like the personal work, like the internal stuff, because the choices that you make are all based on the beliefs that you hold about yourself and about kind of yourself in relation to the world. And we don't understand what those are usually about that we hold, but they're dictating our lives. There was I think it was Carl Jung that had the quote. I'm trying to remember exactly who it was, but let me see. Actually, let me pull this up, because it's good enough to, like, I definitely don't want to mess this up. Let me find this here. It is oops, here, so close. Here it is. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And it's Carl Jung. I keep saying Jung because I've said that way forever, but it's Jung. But that I found has been more true than anything else. So shedding light, being able to observe the dynamics that are happening internally, to make conscious choices so that you're able to meet your own needs, instead of like the coping mechanisms that you've been utilizing for years that you're not even aware of, so that those aren't the way that you get those needs met, and being willing to live in, honestly, a deep sense of uncomfortability during that transition process, and to adapt to a new way of existing where the constant is like a level of uncomfortability and change. That's what I would say is like the biggest thing that's been hard to do, because you're always changing, you're always growing. And so there is not like a set place that you will always like guaranteed stay forever. I try to think of it as like, well, I have to be willing to throw out any or all of what I've learned or who I've become at any time. And that's really hard to like feel like confident in, to move forward, to take any step forward at any time. But it's definitely possible. You kind of have to, there's this idea of, holding something loosely. If it's your dreams, if you hold it too tightly, it'll slip through your fingers. But if it's too loose, if you're just open hand, you'll never hold anything at all. So it's that balance.
That's awesome. That's a great way to describe it too. It is a balance. It is a balance of just understanding yourself, understanding where you are in life and what you want out of life. Knowing that those things will change, knowing that who you are right now isn't the final version of yourself. It all plays a major role. I know for myself, my life changed. I had a daughter, and after that, I was like, whoa, it recontextualized so much for me. And I was like, okay, this is different. Everything feels a little bit different. And then just going through the journey of I think she's turning 1 year in about, like 3 weeks. So it's just been interesting to see how this past year has been of becoming a father, going through the journey of what that means, dealing with identity, because I thought that I had found this person who I was going to be, and then I became and added another title to that and seeing what that means and how that influences relationships and friendships and the different dynamics at play. It's interesting because life continues to throw curveballs. It continues to challenge you. So it's finding ways to balance all of that. It's finding ways to know what's important to you. And that's where success comes in at. How well you can navigate that and how well you can accept yourself and love yourself and continue to do the things that make you happy and the things you enjoy. Ultimately, that's all we really have is these opportunities to, like, for me to connect with someone like you and like be able to say, wow, I get to meet someone really cool, and know that every week that's a part of my life. And that's something I always enjoy, something I always look forward to, and something that I want to continue to look forward to. So prioritizing that and these interactions and making sure to maintain those relationships. And like you said earlier, that's something that's important to you too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like we have a lot in common there. Empowering people and building relationships are two core values. It sounds like, for both of us. I mean, both in all the stuff that you do, when it comes to being on that committee with NACA, I would imagine many other areas in your life, but also like, here you're giving a platform, to people to, reach more listeners. And that's awesome. That's empowering all the people that, come on. So yeah, man, I think it's great what you're doing. I'm excited that we got to connect.
Oh, definitely. So where can people find you online? Where can they connect with you? Where can they listen to your music?
Yeah, the best way to connect with me is probably any of the social medias, which I still check compulsively. My TikTok's kind of blowing up right now, which is very exciting. So I've got almost 5,000 followers on there. But if you want to listen to my music, just Google LJR music. That's probably the fastest way. But you can also find me on Spotify, Apple Music. Just search for LJR. You'll find me under all that stuff. And if you want to see the sci-fi series, just type that into Google LJR music and you'll find it. So there's 3 episodes out so far. So it's almost, I think it's about 25 minutes of like actual footage. So yeah, 9 more episodes coming. There's 12 of them in total. So
definitely, I'm super excited about that. Any last words, any last messages you want to leave for the listeners as we're coming up on the end of our time?
It's a good question. I think one thing that popped in my mind as you were talking a little bit earlier is like to think about what does success actually look like for you, and to try to like to turn that into a very concrete thing with metrics like numbers. Like for me, for example, with my music, I want to hit 100,000 monthly listeners over the next year on Spotify. I also want to make 5K a month in revenue from merch sales, Patreon, things like that, from my music exclusively. And then with FundUp, I want to, have ideally like 1,000 donors that are giving monthly to different nonprofits, and together having $10,000 a month that we've raised. That's ongoing, being given, to different nonprofits. So that's kind of how I define like my professional, success metrics for that level of being happy. But then personally, like I want to continue to observe and discover internally, how do I work and what do I truly want, and how do I kind of navigate after that? And if you're struggling to figure out what does success look like for you, it may be because there are some disconnects with what it is that you want. And so depending on where you come from, there may be a level of guilt around what do you truly want, or like wanting something at all. That can sometimes, be morally wrong in a similar kind of way to the way that I grew up. So just giving yourself the space to explore that, and the grace when you are feeling uncomfortable or insecure, or even a sense of shame, around that, and to let yourself navigate those feelings And honestly, I always recommend therapy because it's just, if you got somebody that's taking care of you from like a physical doctor point of view, like having a mental health doctor is like amazing. And I think we need that more than ever in the world today. So.
Thank you. I co-sign all of that. That's amazing. I appreciate you making the time and coming on. I can't wait till everyone's listening to this. I definitely appreciate the wisdom that you dropped. You dropped a lot of knowledge today, and I think everyone's going to take away a ton from this episode.
Awesome, man. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And listeners, you already know, make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe. Rate the podcast. Y'all ratings have been really helping. I say that. So make sure you rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you're listening on Spotify. With that being said, peace out.
Scribble notes when I wrote these quotes. If I offend, pardon me, there's more of me to grow. Creative in my process, enjoy the show. The will is different when you recognize the different strokes. Different folks, same goals, we all want the most. So when we reach the top, we can enjoy the toast. The type of bread we get is fresh about the bakery. Told them don't play with me, with or without a degree, don't question my intensity. Bravery, similar to agencies that want to see you fall. So just pray for me. Einstein with my